1. Some background information. I have driven for about 2 years, as long as I have legally been able to, and have lived in this town for 6 years. I remember things in pictures, so immediately I can see someone's house once, and already will know how to get there from anywhere in town. I guess what I'm saying is I have rarely gotten lost in town, and know where everything is. I was at a school event with my best friend and friend, who are dating but is not related to this story. While we were hanging out, I got a text from an old friend who I have a lot of history with. She said she had overdosed and was in the hospital. To cut to the chase, and leave out personal details, I visited her twice throughout the night. At one point, I was driving the friend's car while my best friend and other friend were in the back seat cuddling. Talk about third wheeling, am I right? We dropped off my best friend, and my friend was almost sleeping in the back seat. Immediately it started pouring, and I asked my friend if I could see this girl one last time that night before we made it home. We live very close to each other. He muttered out a "sure," and then fell asleep. I made my way to the main road of my friend's neighborhood and took a right through a neighborhood towards the hospital. Immediately the road curves to the right and then the left. Then I make many more curves, but I don't remember taking any straight turns. After a few minutes, I end up back on the main road with a cornfield to my right, a red church to my left. This was unusual. In fact, this was so unusual to me that I didn't know where the heck I was. I felt lost, like I had never been here before. I mean, I do live in the Midwest, but I knew where every church and cornfield in town was, and this area did not look one bit familiar. I drive hands shaking for a minute or two until finally I see a cornfield to my right and a neighborhood to my left that looks familiar to me. During those few minutes, there were maybe 3 light posts the entire way. After I see the familiar sight, I start slowing down. I look behind me, and the view where I came from still doesn't look familiar. We approach the road that I took out of my best friend's neighborhood. I was going the exact opposite way down the main road that I was going down a few minutes before. I freaked out, because there was no way the one road I took off the main road led back to the main road. None of the roads in this town do that. You have to eventually turn, and there was no way I did. Eventually I made my way to the hospital and all was fine. My theory? I think I experienced a glitch on that road, and may have entered an alternate timeline, alternative town, where I went the other way down the road or lived in an entirely different town. Logically, the only thing I can think of that could explain this would possibly be that I was worried about this girl, and it was dark out. Maybe I did just get lost, but I don't think so. I've tried multiple times taking the same road, and I've never appeared going the opposite way down the main road, because it doesn't lead to it. I've even gone to the point where I started recognizing my town with the cornfield on the right, and the neighborhood on the left, and looked behind me like I did that night. It doesn't look like the way it did that night at all. It looked like a completely different place. I know how to get everywhere in this town, so I believe I experienced a glitch. Maybe the heavy pouring rain had something to do with it, as it only lasted a few minutes and occurred a few times throughout the night, which is unusual weather for my town. Just a thought, though. 2. So to start this story off, I'll just say, yes, I do believe in aliens. And they are the only solution I've been able to conclude from this weird experience. A few weeks ago, Black Friday 2017 to be exact, my family and I were heading to Ohio to visit family in the wee hours of the morning, hoping to beat traffic. We were driving down the I-70E near Indianapolis. Kids were all passed out in the back. My wife and I were chatting as I drove along. I was glancing up occasionally at the beautiful display of stars above my head when I saw something completely unexplainable. I glanced upward and, to my shock, what seemed to be a star just dropped right out of the sky. And I'm not talking a shooting star. Imagine putting those star stickers on your ceiling, and then laying down looking up at them, and one just falls right off to the ground. Only difference here is that it seemed like it fell but disappeared. It didn't crash to Earth or even seem to come into the atmosphere, just fell into oblivion. Weirded out by what I had just seen, I glanced to my wife without saying a word, And she looked at me and said, "Did you see that?" And I'm like, the star just dropped out of the sky, yeah. What the fuck, that was weird. She responded saying I wasn't going to say anything till you looked at me. I thought I was crazy. We kept talking about how weird it was, and glancing up, driving along when... what the fuck do we see but another star falling into oblivion? We were freaking out at this point, and trying to figure out what the fuck was happening. We didn't see any more the rest of the drive, but no matter where I search, I cannot find any info on stars dropping out of the sky. Have any of you ever heard or seen something this odd? My best guess is alien ships zooming off, but I'm not sure what to think. Leave your thoughts in the comments, please. I'd love to see some kind of explanation. Stay creepy, friends. 3. It was a typical Monday morning for me. I had gotten up after a full weekend, got ready for work, and headed to the office. I work in the technology industry, and am responsible for conducting a wide variety of marketing campaigns. Monday mornings can be exceptionally busy, so it's not uncommon for me to work half the day away before even getting up to grab a snack or use the restroom. This Monday was quite busy. I had a decent number of upcoming campaigns that needed lots of attention. There was one campaign in particular I was stressing about that morning. It was a webinar, an online presentation event that I was responsible for coordinating. In order to move forward on the project, I needed some additional assets from Gregory, the main speaker. It was around 9:30 a.m. when I began to write my email request for the assets. About 5 to 10 minutes later I was done. I hit send, and then added a check mark next to the line item on my checklist. Due to the volume of ongoing projects, it's typical to experience a wait time of 2 business days before receiving detailed assets like the ones I requested. I thought to myself, okay, I should be getting the assets by Wednesday at 10 a.m. And I made a small notation on the line item that simply read, Wednesday, as a reminder of when I should follow up, if I didn't hear back by then. From that point, I moved on to the next task, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. Eventually, after completing a slew of other tasks and attending to a 30-minute team meeting, I looked at the clock and it was around 11:55. I started to feel a little woozy from the constant stream of work, so I was getting ready to head to the break room for some food. I checked my inbox before getting up, and to my surprise there was a reply email from Gregory. I opened up the email and found out all of the assets I requested were there in full. I thought to myself, wow, he must not have had much going on this morning. It would have taken all morning for him to create these assets. Then, when I'm inspecting the email closer, I noticed something extremely odd. The timestamp on my request email to Gregory read, Thursday 2:34 p.m. from the previous week. I was in shock. Stunned, I just stared at the timestamp for a good few seconds without flinching. A wave of thoughts swept over me. Maybe I had already sent the request last week and somehow forgot. So maybe the email I sent today was a second one, asking for the same things. Seemed reasonable enough. So I referenced my checklist from last week. I didn't see an entry for the task. So then I thought, well, I can check my email send history on the computer. So I went to the last Thursday's send history. And indeed, there was the email in my outbox. So I quickly went to Monday's send history, and there was no record of me sending an email to Gregory Monday morning. I went back to the email from Thursday and read it carefully. It was verbatim what I remembered having just typed up a few hours ago. I then looked at my checklist and the notation I had adding to the line item. Wednesday was gone. I wrote it in pen. There was no way it could have been erased. Highly confused, I went to the break room to get some coffee and food. As I was standing by the coffee machine, I saw Gregory walking down the hall, so I flagged him over. When he approached, I said, "What's up, man?" and we chatted a little about our weekends. Then I said, "Hey, thanks for sending me the assets for the presentation." He replied, "No problem. I actually meant to get them to you by the end of day Friday, but I wasn't able to finish them up until this morning." Immediately thinking about the timestamp anomaly, I casually asked Gregory, "When did you receive my request for those assets? Were you working on them before I sent the email request or something?" He answered, "I think it was Thursday because I worked on them Thursday night." To which I gave him a weird look and said, "Man, it's so odd, but I could have sworn I just sent you that email request this morning." He looked at me kind of funny and said, "It happens. Time is flying around here." To which I just nodded my head in agreement, and we walked our separate ways. I hid it well, but that really freaked me out. I clearly remembered writing and sending that request just a few hours ago in the morning. I'm very meticulous with my projects and planning. That incident was more than your average losing track of time experience. It makes no sense at all. 4. I've lived in Brooklyn most of my life. When I was a child, a good deal of my mother's family lived in the area as well. One night, when I was 4 or 5, my mother and I were taking a walk to my aunt's home. She lived about 15 minutes away. The area was mostly apartment buildings and an assortment of nickel and dime stores that had been closed for the evening. It was also chilly outside, so there were not a lot of people on the streets. We were a few blocks away from my aunt's when I saw a man coming up the block towards us. He had no head. I was terrified and bewildered, clutching at my mother's side, desperately trying to point the man out. But she did not notice him at all. I never took my eyes from him. We passed silently in the night without incident, other than my failed attempt at getting my mother's attention. Beyond being headless, I remember him wearing a purple varsity-style jacket with a New York Deli Chips logo on the back. To this day, some 30 or so years later, that memory stands out. I liked horror movies a lot as a child, and Michael Jackson's Thriller video was hugely popular at the time. I've done my best to convince myself that what I saw was a quirk of my imagination, but I've never fully sold myself on such. A few years later, when I was in 2nd grade, I can recall another bizarre occurrence. My parents and I had just finished breakfast. I had gone into the living room to wait for my mother so she could walk me to school. My father was sitting at his desk in a section of the room he had blocked off as a makeshift office and playing a jazz record on the stereo. As I was waiting, one of our 2 cats began dry heaving very loudly, enough so that my father looked up from his desk and my mother came into the room to see what was happening. The cat began scooting backwards, and the music on the radio warped. Just then, the cat spoke in a distorted human voice and said, "All your days," just before vomiting and running off. We all stood staring at one another in a kind of shocked panic. My father stammered, "What just happened?" I exclaimed, "The cat just spoke!" There was a real uneasiness about the whole thing. My mother hurried in to clean up the vomit, then whisked me off to school. The whole walk over, I kept trying to get her to confirm for me what I just witnessed, but all she would say is that she didn't know what had happened. I've brought it up to her a number of times over the years, but she's always given me that same non-answer. For anyone who is curious, neither of my cats exhibited any odd behavior beyond that, and both lived fairly long lives. I would like to say I do not subscribe to the supernatural, and I believe there is a scientific explanation for everything, given proper scrutiny. These memories, however, continue to change that. 5. I had my first job as a nurse in a nursing home, and I just switched to the night shift. I and one more person had the responsibility for the whole floor, consisting of about 40 persons who lived there. The 2 nurses I worked for and with were the kindest, sweetest old in-the-game persons you can imagine. I either was covering for one or the other of them, and even though the work was tough, there was always a joy in working with them. We shared stories and went together to every room, even if there were not 2 persons needed, and the old folks loved it. We always began the night shift checking in on everybody, giving the 10 o'clock medicines and checking so everything that is supposed to be locked was locked. We had a few wanderers, as we called them, meaning those who suffered from angst or would just sleepwalk in the corridors of the nursing home's floor. We would talk to them, sit them down, or drink tea or coffee with them so they felt safe and could go to sleep. Some of them were far lost in the cloud of senile dementia or other forms of dementia, and they just wandered aimlessly. and if they seemed happy with it, we would leave them be so they would not be worried. You can imagine the strange sounds in the night, or someone's sudden scream. The wanderers sometimes accidentally walked into someone else's room and woke them up. There was nothing that surprised us. It was a night watch, and this was a place where many people would pass away, so you do your best not to think about ghosts. To answer your question, yes, it gets worse around the full moon. Still don't know why, but just ask anyone working the night shift at a dementia ward. To add some spice to this story, I must explain, this place used to be a hospital and is now turned into a nursing home, so the place still has a cold room. For after everyone has paid their respects, and the person is waiting for the funeral. I know it may sound morbid, but somebody has to do that job, and it is done with the utmost respect, and two persons follow the person on the journey, and you treat the person as if he or she is still alive, with carefulness and reverence. Also, too many times you said hello to one of the residencies walking through or sitting in the corridor on the way to do something else, and then realized they'd been dead for a few months. This could easily be one's brain being so used to seeing the person and having a stressful job that you create an image of something familiar in your head. It never happened to me outside of work, though. So this one cold winter's night, we walk the corridors and everyone is asleep, which occurs about the day after the last full moon. We hear a strange noise like someone trying to get through a locked door. So we check every door on the way through the corridors to see that no one has locked themselves into a bathroom or a closet. Finally, we find the source. The closet where we have all the linen for the beds, protective gear, gloves, stuff like that. It is always locked, so we have to have keys to get in, since the wanderers go in there day and night, and it is not always a very hygienic outcome. So, as a rule, we keep it locked. We had our guess of who it could be inside, and though maybe the poor guy thought he went into the bathroom, since it is that kind of lock on the inside that you don't need keys for, only from the outside. The door handle furiously moves up and down like somebody really desperate is trying to get through the door, and then bangs at the door and proceeds with the same furiousness on the door handle. We both see this and get our keys to let the poor man out. When we open the door, you guessed it, the closet is empty. No one is there, and the moment we open the door, the handle stops moving. It is a long and narrow room, and you can see everything just from standing in the doorway. But being the thorough nurses we are, we go inside to make totally sure no one is in there. Although there's no chance in hell anyone could hide that fast. The handle was still moving as we opened the door. And there is no place to hide, so you can't be seen. My colleague waits outside, looking in while I search the room. Then the handle starts again, and I bolt out of the room. We slam the door shut, and lock it again. We both stare at the handle, and with one last jerk, the handle stops moving. We both stare at the handle for a few seconds more, and she says, "We both saw that, didn't we?" I just nodded. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 61. Thank you very much to everybody who sent their stories in for use in this video. If you yourself have a story, then please send it to kingofthecities@gmail.com, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the description, you'll also find my email in the link of every video. Only request I make is that it be your own story, and if you're under the age of 16, you get permission from your parent or guardian, and put the type of story it is in the subject line. Apart from that, send it in, and I'll see what I can do with it. I know it's a little bit of a mix this week, but that's kind of what we're working with at the moment. Some of the stories I had were of the right type, but they were a bit short. Others need a bit of a rewrite, which I don't really have time to do at the moment. So we're working with a bit of a mixture. What else? Oh yeah, I might put up a little bonus at some point this week. I've got some poems recorded at the Tamerlane, so I might actually get that edited properly and uploaded at some point this week, just as a little bonus. Okay, I think I'm going to head off for now. It's actually thankfully been relatively quiet here today. Must be the rain scaring the dogs and all that off. Okay, so I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.